We've seen protests taking place in Sudan after the military took over, and the recent resignation by the Prime Minister Abdalla Hamdok. Well, joining us now is Dr. Jok Madut Jok, who's a professor of Citizenship and Public Affairs at Syracuse University. But he joins us now from Juba in South Sudan. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Great to have you on the program.
Thank you very much, sir. And I'm sorry for the disconnection there of the power.
Oh, no, don't worry. All right, so...
Honored to be here again.
So disturbing scenes playing out in the north of you in Sudan. Another civilian was killed today by authorities, another protester, and that's adding to the 3 that were killed on Thursday. Surely this is unsustainable.
It definitely is not sustainable. In fact, since October 2021, over 60 civilians have been killed by the Sudan's military and other security forces. All of it over the quagmire that is now the political military situation in Sudan, including the coup which took place in October, where the military partner of the transitional government decided to take the helms of power and to sideline the government that had been a product of coalition forces, freedom and change forces in Sudan. And since that coup, what has surfaced is that a lot of people in Sudan were saying that they will not have the military back in office since they had just reached a short while before the end of the transitional period and the switch to the civilian government before the elections in this year, in 2022. Now, the issue that is plaguing Sudan at this moment is that the military wanted to take power. Prime Minister Abdalla Hamdok wanted the transitional government to push up to the time of elections, and the civilian protesters, not just in Khartoum, but all across Sudan, are saying no to the military. Therefore, what you had was a situation where the Prime Minister has been rendered unable to run the technocratic part of that arrangement, and the public in Sudan not willing to take the military as their government. So you have a situation where you cannot continue to run a democratic government and where you cannot have a military government in office. You are in a serious bind there. I think what will happen as a result of this situation is that the Sudanese people will continue to protest all across the country. Prime Minister Hamdok is gone. The military is still in office. The UN is now saying we should have a dialogue. I'm not sure what the dialogue will be about.
Well, let's talk about the United Nations dialogue. I mean, what they're trying to do is bring all the political voices to the table, including the military, and to find a solution. Has that any chance of success? Because that would create the impression that a compromise can be reached by the military, whereas the people just want them gone.
Absolutely. I don't think the UN has any measurable leverage against the protesters nor against the military. The military insists that they are the ones with the stamina to stabilize the situation. A lot of people are increasingly saying that perhaps Sudan needs that military to stabilize the situation and then hold elections. But the ordinary people are saying we have seen the military for far too long in our lives. It was in the 60s, it was in the 70s. It is now, it has been for the last 30 years, the military power. Nobody, no civilian of any reasonable capacity to think for themselves wants a military in office anymore. So what is the UN going to be able to do? I think the UN can simply say, let us sit together around the table, all the professional associations, the civil society groups, the women's union, the student union, the youth unions on the one side, and then the military on the other, and think about the future of Sudan. I don't think the UN has any capacity to moderate this discussion to any satisfactory level, especially on the side of the ordinary civilians who are saying, we want the military out. We had a perfectly functioning government, despite all its weaknesses, that was steering the country towards elections, where the Sudanese people would elect their leaders, but the military squandered all of that and trashed the entire revolutionary process that took place since 2019. I don't think the UN really has any capacity or any understanding of the depth of disappointment that the people of Sudan feel at this very moment.
All right, so if we think that the people of Sudan brought down the regime of Omar al-Bashir, which perhaps was more formidable than that of General Fatah al-Burhan, it seems inevitable that the will of the people will be victorious eventually, and it's more a question of time. With that being the case then, how can the general be persuaded to give up the game before it's given up for him?
That is the question. If the general has the capacity to gauge the determination of the neighborhood committees and civil rights movements all across the country, the general would have been well advised to seek alternatives other than the military being in office. And say, for example, let us have a coalition government. I think that is what the UN is now talking about, that if we can just persuade the military to recreate a transitional joint government where the military is in place, but they also have a technocratic government that can run the everyday affairs of the country, maybe we can get somewhere and then set out a timetable for elections. I think that's what the UN is betting on. But it doesn't seem plausible to any ordinary Sudanese who have hated the role of the military in politics since 1958. And therefore, I don't think the ordinary citizens are willing to have anything to do with the negotiation with the military. And all they want is for the military to go back to the barracks and let the political parties, the professional associations sit down together and reignite the establishment of the Sudanese state on a new basis, away from the basis on which it has been run by the military. The last 30 years, the last 60 years, in fact.
So what can happen to fix this? I mean, we see ECOWAS taking a strong stand in Mali, saying we're shutting these borders until you have elections. What needs to happen before there's an intervention in Sudan? Civilians are being killed every day by authorities, and some might say that these are actually crimes that the general will have to answer to.
No, I think the military will have its way in terms of quashing the protest. And if they were to save their faces, they will then say, this is only an interim military government to be in place for a year or so, after which we will hold elections and the civilian government will be both voted in, and then we will go back to our barracks. That's the line they are going to tell the UN. The civilians are saying, no, if we give the military a foothold at this moment, it will not, they will not leave office in our lifetime. We've seen that with Numeri, seen that with Bashir. We don't want to repeat that. We saw that with Ahud.
Can the African Union not intervene?
No, the African Union will intervene with the statements, statements of deep concern, but the African Union has demonstrated its uselessness over the years when it comes to reining in on military leaders and dictators all across Africa. I'm not so sure any Sudanese person is holding their breath for the African Union to come to their aid. It's a talking shop. It's an organization that makes statements of condemnation to no avail. I think what will change this dynamic is the ordinary Sudanese people continuing that protest to the point of exhausting the military, to the point where Sudan is on the verge of collapse, where ordinary, everyday running of the state has been undermined. And therefore, the military will eventually give in to the protest if they can sustain it, or the military will kill more people and force more people into their homes away from the streets, and the military will prevail. It's either or. No intervention from outside will mean much.
All right.
The two sides are determined to take it to the end of the day.
Let's talk about the voices inside Sudan then. We know about the military. We had this prime minister who we believe enjoyed the support of the movement for the time that he was prime minister. And then he was taken out of office by the military. He still enjoyed support, but he seems to have lost some credibility and some ground when he came back to the table and tried to bring in the military in a power-sharing agreement. Have we seen the last of Abdalla Hamdok? And what other voices can step forward to represent the people of the country? Or is this going to be another one of those people-led movements that will change the game?
You know, the thing is, with Sudan, even when people seem to get and go on the streets or in unison, the reality is that all those people belong to political parties. They belong to associations. They belong to professional organizations. Each one of them having their own idea about what Sudan should look like. So to get all of them to agree on an outcome is very difficult. What Prime Minister Hamdok faced in the initial days of the 2019 revolution was that he gave all the positions, almost all the positions, all the power to the diaspora. And so they came out of the woodworks, from Europe to the Middle East, to United States, to the rest of Africa, to take up the helms of power in Khartoum. This angered those people who had been inside Sudan, who know Sudan better, who have lived in such circumstances under dictatorship and wanted to be the ones who take power. And so the majority of Sudanese people were critical of Hamdok. In fact, even as they were opposing the military coup, they were not opposing the military coup on behalf of Hamdok. Good riddance that Hamdok went. And as he comes back a man who has lost the fervor that people had around him. So now that he has gone again for the second time, it is the political parties, it is the professional associations who are saying, let us keep the momentum of the protest going until we have disempowered the military, and we will be able to then sit together and chart out a future for Sudan outside the military rule. We don't want the military to come back. The military will insist that we are the only ones, because we represent all corners of Sudan who can now stabilize the country, hold power for a year, then hold elections, the political parties will come in. So it's a loggerhead that will be very, very difficult to untangle.
Dr. Jok Madut Jok, will chat again very soon. I'm hoping that we can catch up and what you see and observe where you are in South Sudan, another very interesting part of the country.
Really appreciate it. Have a good night.
Have a good evening.
Okay.